The coffee was scalding, but her silence burned hotter. Officer Garrett Walsh thought he was just putting someone in their place at the diner that Tuesday morning. He thought the quiet, elderly black woman in the corner was nobody, just another invisible face he could bully to feel big. He watched the dark stain spread across her white blouse and laughed. He didn't know that the woman, Mrs. Sarah Jenkins, wasn't just a retired housekeeper. He didn't know that the trembling hands wiping away the coffee had once held the future of the entire state's justice system. Garrett was about to learn a brutal lesson. Be careful who you step on, because you never know who they raised. This is the story of how one spilled cup of coffee ended a career. The morning rush at Louis' Grill in downtown Oak Creek had finally died down to a dull hum. The air smelled of bacon grease, stale cigarette smoke lingering from the patio, and the sharp, acidic scent of cheap filter coffee. At table 4, near the window that overlooked the grey, slushy street, sat Sarah Jenkins. She was 72 years old, though her smooth, dark skin and the straightness of her spine made her look a decade younger. She wore her Sunday best, even though it was a Tuesday. A pristine white blouse with a high collar, a grey wool cardigan, and a sensible skirt. Her hands, weathered from 50 years of scrubbing other people's floors and holding other people's babies, were wrapped around a mug of tea. She was waiting. She wasn't waiting for trouble. She was waiting for her grandson to pick her up for a doctor's appointment. The bell above the door jingled aggressively. The atmosphere in the diner shifted instantly. The low murmur of conversation cut out, replaced by the clatter of silverware and the sudden, intense interest everyone seemed to take in their eggs. Officer Garrett Walsh walked in. Garrett was a man who took up too much space. Broad-shouldered and heavy around the gut, he wore his uniform like a suit of armor that was slightly too tight. He had been on the Oak Creek force for 22 years, long enough to know exactly where the security cameras didn't reach and which judges played golf with the chief. He had a face that turned red easily, usually when he was laughing at his own jokes or screaming at a teenager for jaywalking. Today he was already red. He'd had a bad morning. His ex-wife was dragging him back to court over alimony, and his captain had chewed him out over a misplaced evidence log. Garrett needed a target. He needed to feel like he was the one in control. He stomped to the counter, throwing a glare at the teenage waitress, Becky, who flinched. "Coffee. Black. To go," Garrett barked, drumming his fingers on the laminate counter. "And make it fresh. Last time it tasted like dishwater." "Yes, Officer Walsh," Becky squeaked, rushing to the pot. Garrett turned, scanning the room. His eyes swept over the construction workers in the back. Too much trouble. They swept over the young couple in the booth. Too boring. Then his eyes landed on table 4. Sarah Jenkins. He knew her face, vaguely. She was one of those women who had been around town forever, usually seen walking to the bus stop or carrying groceries. To Garrett, she represented a demographic he despised, quiet, dignified, and present. He hated how she didn't look down when he scanned the room. She was looking out the window, ignoring him completely. That irked him. In Garrett's world, when a badge walked in, you paid attention. You showed fear. He grabbed the steaming styrofoam cup Becky placed on the counter. He didn't pay. He never paid at Louis'. Instead of leaving, Garrett walked slowly toward table 4. The heavy thud of his boots on the linoleum was the only sound in the diner. Sarah sensed him coming. She didn't flinch, but her grip on her tea mug tightened slightly. She kept her eyes on the street. Garrett stopped right at the edge of her table, his shadow falling over her. "You plan on buying something else, or you just gonna take up space all morning?" Garrett asked. His voice was loud, intended for an audience. Sarah turned her head slowly. Her eyes were dark and calm. "I have finished my breakfast, officer. I am waiting for my ride." "This ain't a bus stop," Garrett sneered. "It's a place of business. You people think you can just loiter wherever you want." The racism wasn't subtle. It rarely was with Garrett. He leaned in, the badge on his chest gleaming under the harsh fluorescent lights. "I purchased a meal," Sarah said softly. Her voice was steady, refined. It was the voice of a woman who had read bedtime stories to children who grew up to be senators. "I have the receipt right here." She tapped a small slip of paper next to her tea. Garrett looked at the receipt, then back at her. Her lack of fear infuriated him. He wanted her to stutter. He wanted her to beg. "I don't care about your receipt," Garrett said, his voice dropping to a dangerous growl. "I care about the atmosphere. You're disturbing the peace." "I haven't said a word until you spoke to me," Sarah pointed out. "Are you talking back to me?" Garrett's face flushed a darker shade of crimson. He took the lid off his steaming coffee. The diner held its breath. Becky, behind the counter, covered her mouth with her hand. "I am stating a fact," Sarah said. "Well, here's a fact," Garrett said, grinning cruelly. "Oops." He tipped his hand. It wasn't a splash. It was a deliberate pour. The scalding black coffee cascaded out of the cup and onto Sarah's lap, soaking into the pristine white blouse and the grey wool skirt. Sarah gasped, the pain immediate and shocking. The heat seared her skin through the fabric. She shoved her chair back, standing up quickly to shake the liquid off, her hands trembling. "Oh, look at that!" Garrett laughed, tossing the empty cup onto the table. "Clumsy me. You should probably go clean that up. Outside." Sarah looked down at the brown stain ruining her clothes. Tears of pain pricked her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She looked up at Garrett, and for a second, the officer felt a strange chill. There was no fear in her eyes. There was only a profound, terrifying disappointment. "You will regret that," Sarah whispered. It wasn't a threat, it was a prophecy. Garrett laughed harder. "Is that a threat? Are you threatening a police officer?" He unclipped the radio from his shoulder. "We got a 10 to 16 at Louis' Grill. Disorderly conduct. Suspect is belligerent and threatening an officer. Send a unit." He looked back at Sarah, smiling like a shark. "You want to talk about regret? Let's take a ride downtown." The handcuffs were tight, too tight. Garrett had cinched them down on Sarah's thin wrists with unnecessary force, pinching the delicate skin. "Stop resisting!" Garrett yelled for the benefit of the onlookers as he marched her out of the diner. Sarah wasn't resisting. She was walking with her head high, despite the burning sensation on her chest and legs where the coffee was still wet. She didn't scream. She didn't curse. She simply walked. Becky, the waitress, ran out the front door. "Officer, she didn't do anything. You poured it on her." Garrett spun around, pointing a finger in Becky's face. "You want to be charged with obstruction, sweetheart? Get back inside and wipe down that table." Becky froze, tears in her eyes, and retreated. The construction workers looked down at their boots. In Oak Creek, you didn't cross Garrett Walsh unless you wanted your truck impounded or your permits revoked. Garrett shoved Sarah into the back of his cruiser. The hard plastic seat was unforgiving. He slammed the door, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the morning air. As he got into the driver's seat, Sarah closed her eyes. She wasn't praying for mercy. She was composing herself. She was mentally scrolling through a Rolodex of names she hadn't used in years. She had spent her life raising the children of Oak Creek's elite. She had changed their diapers, bandaged their scraped knees, and taught them right from wrong when their own parents were too busy attending galas or working late at the firm. She had retired 5 years ago, disappearing into a quiet life. Most people assumed she was just an old woman with no connections. Garrett started the engine and peeled away from the curb, sirens blipping unnecessarily to run a red light. "You know," Garrett said, glancing at her in the rearview mirror, "if you'd just kept your mouth shut and moved along, you'd be home watching your soaps right now. But you people always have to have an attitude." Sarah stared out the window at the passing town. She saw the park where she used to push a stroller in 1985. She saw the elementary school where she had picked up a crying boy in 1993 because his father forgot him. "Officer Walsh," Sarah said calmly, "shut up back there." "I feel it is only fair to warn you," she continued, her voice cutting through the hum of the engine. "My grandson will be looking for me, and when he doesn't find me at the diner, he will make a phone call." Garrett scoffed. "Let him call. Who's he gonna call? His homies. I'll arrest them too." "He will call his godfather," Sarah said. Garrett laughed so hard he nearly swerved into the other lane. "His godfather? What is this, the mafia? You watch too many movies, lady." "The coffee burns," Sarah said, changing the subject. "I will need medical attention." "You'll get a Band-Aid at booking if you're lucky," Garrett sneered. They arrived at the precinct. It was a drab brick building that smelled of floor wax and misery. Garrett hauled her out of the car and paraded her through the bullpen. Other officers looked up. Some smirked when they saw Garrett with an elderly woman. Others looked away, uncomfortable but unwilling to intervene. "What you got there, Garrett?" called out Officer Miller, a younger cop who was trying too hard to fit in. "Disorderly," Garrett announced, dumping Sarah's purse on the booking desk. "Threatened me, refused a lawful order, and look at her, she's a mess, probably off her meds." The booking sergeant, a tired woman named Linda, looked at Sarah. Linda frowned. "Garrett, she's soaking wet. Did you—" "She spilled coffee on herself in a rage," Garrett lied smoothly. "Book her. I got to go write this up." "Name?" Linda asked Sarah, her voice softer. "Sarah Jenkins," Sarah said. Linda typed it in. "Okay, Sarah, give me your hands." Linda uncuffed her. Sarah rubbed her wrists. They were bruised purple. "I need to make my phone call," Sarah said. "In a minute, honey. We got to process you," Linda said. "Fingerprints, mugshot." The humiliation was systematic. Sarah was forced to stand against the grey wall, holding a placard with a number on it. Click. The flash was blinding. She was forced to press her fingers onto the glass scanner. Her hands, which had taught a future surgeon how to hold a spoon, were now being catalogued like a criminal's. Finally, she was led to a holding cell. It was empty, thankfully. A metal bench, a toilet in the corner. "Phone call," Sarah repeated, as Linda went to close the gate. Linda sighed and passed a phone through the bars. "Make it quick. Local calls only." Sarah didn't call her grandson. She didn't call a lawyer. She dialed a number she knew by heart, a number that wasn't listed in the phone book. It was a private line. It rang 3 times. "Harrison Sterling," a deep, crisp voice answered, the voice of a man who was used to being listened to. Sarah took a breath. "Harry, it's Nana Sarah." There was a pause on the other end, a pause filled with the rustling of papers, stopping abruptly. The tone of the voice changed instantly. It went from professional and cold to warm, concerned, and terrified. "Nana, is everything okay? You never call this line. Is it your heart?" "No, Harry. My heart is fine," Sarah said, watching Garrett Walsh walk past the cell, laughing with a cup of coffee in his hand. "But I am currently in a holding cell at the Oak Creek Police Department. I have been arrested." "You—" "What?" The voice on the other end dropped an octave. It became deadly quiet. "Say that again." I have been arrested by an Officer Garrett Walsh. He poured hot coffee on me, Harry. He said I was disturbing the peace. I am wet, I am burned, and I am sitting in a cage. There was a silence on the other end, so heavy it felt like the air pressure in the room dropped. Don't say another word to anyone, Harry said. Do not sign anything. I am leaving the office now. I will be there in 20 minutes. And Nana? Yes, Harry. I'm bringing the cavalry. 20 miles away, in the state capital, Harrison Harry Sterling stood up from his mahogany desk. Harry wasn't just a lawyer. He was the state prosecutor, the district attorney for the entire county, and the front-runner for the attorney general position in the next election. He was a man who put serial killers on death row and took down corporate fraud rings. He was feared by criminals and judges alike. But before he was any of that, he was a scared, lonely 6-year-old boy whose parents had died in a car crash. He was the boy Sarah Jenkins had taken in when she was the housekeeper for his grandfather. She hadn't just cleaned the house, she had raised him. She was the one who sat up with him when he had nightmares. She was the one who made sure he did his homework. She was the only mother he had ever really known. Harry slammed his phone down. His executive assistant, Jessica, rushed in. "Mr. Sterling, what's wrong?" "Cancel the meeting with the governor," Harry said, grabbing his coat. His face was pale with rage. "But sir, it's regarding the budget. I don't care if it's regarding the apocalypse," Harry roared. "Get the car and call Chief O'Malley in Oak Creek. Tell him I am coming to his precinct, and tell him if he wants to keep his job, he better meet me at the front door." "Yes, sir." Harry paused at the door. "And Jessica, call the state police. I want a convoy. I want them to know we aren't just visiting." Back at the Oak Creek station, the atmosphere was relaxed. Garrett was recounting the story to a few other officers in the break room, embellishing the details. "So she stands up, right? And she starts screaming that she owns the town." Garrett laughed, biting into a donut. "I tell her, 'Lady, the only thing you own is the right to remain silent.'" Classic. Officer Miller laughed nervously. "She looked pretty frail, Garrett. You sure she was a threat?" "Trust me, kid," Garrett said, wiping sugar off his lip. "Those quiet ones are the worst. You gotta break 'em early, show 'em who's boss. She'll plead out, pay a fine, and I'll never see her again." At the front desk, the phone rang. Linda answered it. "Oak Creek Police, Sergeant Linda speaking." "This is the governor's office," a woman's voice said, sharp and urgent. "Please hold for the state attorney general's liaison." Linda's eyes went wide. She covered the receiver. "Guys, why is the governor's office calling?" Before anyone could answer, the front doors of the station didn't just open. They were thrown open. But it wasn't Harry yet. It was Sarah's grandson, Marcus. He had arrived at the diner, found it empty, heard the story from Becky, and driven straight here. Marcus wasn't a prosecutor. Marcus was a linebacker for the state university, 6 feet 4 inches and 250 pounds of muscle. He stormed up to the desk. "Where is she?" Garrett walked out of the break room, hearing the commotion. "Whoa, whoa, settle down, Tiny. Who are you looking for?" "My grandmother, Sarah Jenkins. Becky at the diner said you dragged her out." Marcus's fists were clenched. Garrett smirked. "Ah, the grandson. She said you'd come. Look, she's in processing. She attacked an officer." "That is a lie," Marcus shouted. "Hey!" Garrett put his hand on his taser. "Back off, or you'll be in the cell next to her." The tension was thick enough to choke on. Marcus was ready to fight, and Garrett was itching for an excuse to use force again. Then, the ground seemed to vibrate. Outside the station, the sound of sirens cut through the air. Not the wail of a local cruiser, but the deep, thrumming yelp of state police interceptors. Lots of them. Everyone froze. They looked out the front windows. 3 black SUVs with government plates screeched to a halt at the curb, flanked by 4 state police cruisers with lights flashing. "What the hell is going on?" Garrett muttered, walking to the window. The doors of the lead SUV opened. A man stepped out. He was wearing a 3-piece suit that cost more than Garrett made in a year. He adjusted his cufflinks, his face a mask of cold fury. It was Harrison Sterling. Garrett felt a drop of sweat roll down his back. He recognized the face. Everyone in law enforcement recognized the face. That was the man who signed the indictments. That was the man who investigated police corruption. "Is that the DA?" Linda whispered. Harry didn't walk to the door alone. He was flanked by 2 state troopers and a man carrying a medical bag. Harry burst through the precinct doors, the energy in the room shifting from small-town lazy to national emergency. Chief O'Malley, a balding man with a stain on his tie, came running out of his office, tucking his shirt in. "Mr. Sterling, to what do we owe the honor? We weren't expecting—" Harry walked right past him. He didn't even look at the chief. He scanned the room until his eyes landed on Garrett Walsh. "Where is she?" Harry asked. His voice wasn't loud. It was terrifyingly quiet. "Where is who, sir?" Chief O'Malley asked, bewildered. "Mrs. Sarah Jenkins," Harry said. "The woman your officer arrested 30 minutes ago." Garrett swallowed hard. He stepped forward, trying to summon his usual bravado. "She's in holding, sir. She was disorderly. She poured coffee on—" "Open the cell," Harry interrupted, staring directly at Garrett. "Now." "Sir, there's protocol," Garrett started. "Officer," Harry said, stepping into Garrett's personal space. "If that cell is not open in 10 seconds, I will have you arrested for kidnapping, assault, and obstruction of justice. And since I am the one who prosecutes those crimes, I assure you, you will not get bail." The silence stretched for a heartbeat. Then Garrett fumbled for his keys. His hands were shaking. He led them to the holding cell. Harry rushed forward as the gate swung open. Sarah was sitting on the bench, shivering slightly in her wet clothes. When she saw Harry, her stoic mask finally cracked. A single tear rolled down her cheek. "Harry," she whispered. Harry Sterling, the most feared prosecutor in the state, dropped to his knees on the dirty concrete floor of the cell. He took her bruised hands in his. "I'm here, Nana. I've got you." He looked at her blouse, stained brown and clinging to her skin. He looked at the redness on her neck. He turned his head slowly to look at Garrett Walsh. The look in Harry's eyes wasn't human. It was predatory. "You poured hot coffee on her?" Harry asked. "It was an accident," Garrett stammered. "She slipped." "Get the medic in here," Harry yelled. Then he stood up, towering over Garrett. "You didn't just pour coffee on a woman, Officer Walsh. You poured coffee on the woman who taught me how to tie my shoes. You poured coffee on the woman who sat front row at my law school graduation when my parents couldn't." Harry turned to the state troopers. "Arrest him!" Garrett's eyes bulged. "What? You can't. I'm a cop." "Not anymore," Harry said coldly. "Read him his rights. And Chief O'Malley, I want the security footage from Louis' grill secured immediately. If 1 second of that tape is missing, I will indict this entire department." As the state troopers grabbed Garrett, slapping his own handcuffs onto his wrists, Sarah stood up, supported by Harry. She looked at Garrett, who was now pale and trembling, realizing his life was over. "I told you," Sarah said softly. "I told you he would come." The emergency room at St. Jude's Hospital was brightly lit and smelled of antiseptic, a stark contrast to the grimy holding cell. Sarah Jenkins sat on a gurney, wearing a hospital gown. Her ruined clothes were bagged as evidence. Harry paced the small curtained area while a doctor examined Sarah. Marcus stood in the corner, his large frame practically vibrating with restrained aggression. He was staring at his phone, scrolling through local social media where rumors of the incident were already beginning to spark. "Second-degree burns on the upper thigh and abdomen," Dr. Aris Thorne said, his voice tight with professional disapproval as he gently applied burn cream to Sarah's skin. "There's blistering. The liquid must have been near boiling point. It will take weeks to heal properly, and there will likely be scarring." Harry stopped pacing. He looked at the angry red welts on the skin of the woman who used to blow on his soup to cool it down. A cold, hard knot formed in his stomach. "Document everything, Doctor," Harry said, his voice devoid of emotion. "Photos, precise measurements of the affected area. I want a full forensic medical report on my desk by end of day." "Already done, Mr. Sterling," Dr. Thorne assured him. He looked at Sarah with immense respect. "You're incredibly tough, Mrs. Jenkins. Most people would be in significant shock right now." Sarah winced slightly as a bandage was applied. "Pain is just a signal, Doctor. I've learned to manage signals over the years." She looked at Harry. "Harrison, stop pacing. You're wearing a hole in the floor. I am fine." "You are not fine, Nana," Harry snapped, though his anger wasn't directed at her. "You were assaulted and kidnapped by a man paid to protect you." His phone buzzed. It was his lead investigator, Maria Gonzalez, a former FBI agent who Harry trusted implicitly. "Talk to me, Maria," Harry said, putting the phone on speaker so Marcus could hear. "We have the footage from Louis' grill." Maria's crisp voice filled the small room. The owner tried to say the cameras were down, but the state troopers convinced him otherwise. "Harry, it's bad." "Describe it." "It wasn't a spill during an argument," Maria said, disgusted. "He toyed with her. He leaned over the table, said something, and then deliberately tipped the cup." He laughed, Harry. He actually laughed while she was standing up in pain. And the arrest, he yanked her so hard I'm surprised he didn't dislocate her shoulder. Harry closed his eyes. "Does the audio pick up what he said?" "It's faint. But yes." He said, "Oops." Then he told her to go clean it up outside. The racial animus is unspoken but incredibly clear in his demeanor. It's a slam dunk for deprivation of civil rights under color of law. "Charge him," Harry said instantly. "Aggravated assault with a dangerous weapon, scalding liquid counts, kidnapping, false imprisonment, official misconduct, and tack on a hate crime enhancement. Throw the entire penal code at him." "There's more," Maria added. "We did a preliminary run on Officer Walsh's jacket. On paper, he's clean. A few reprimands for lateness. Nothing major." "That's impossible," Marcus interrupted from the corner. "A guy like that doesn't start with pouring hot coffee on elderly women. He's been doing this for years." "Exactly," Harry said, his eyes opening. They were ice cold. He's clean because Chief O'Malley has been scrubbing the floors behind him. "Maria, I want a deep dive. Go back 20 years. I want every noise complaint, every jaywalking ticket, every resisting arrest charge Walsh ever filed. Find the people he arrested. The system buried them. We are going to dig them up." Harry hung up and turned to Sarah. He took her hand again, careful not to touch the bandages. "I'm going to burn his life to the ground, Nana," Harry promised. "Legally. Systematically. By the time I'm done, Garrett Walsh won't just be in prison. He will be a cautionary tale they teach in ethics classes." Sarah looked at the man she had raised. She saw the righteous fury, the power he now wielded. She also saw the little boy who hated bullies. "Harrison," she said softly, "do not just do this for me. If he did this to me in broad daylight, Imagine what he has done to others in the dark. Find them. That is true justice. Harry relocated his base of operations to the state capital, taking over a large conference room and turning it into a war room dedicated to the dismantling of Garrett Walsh. One wall was covered with a timeline of Garrett's career. Another was quickly filling up with photos of people, mostly minorities, mostly poor, who had crossed Garrett's path. For 3 days, Harry's team of investigators, led by Maria, tore through the paper-thin veneer of the Oak Creek Police Department. They bypassed Chief O'Malley entirely, using subpoenas to seize records directly from the county servers. The pattern emerged quickly, and it was sickening. Garrett Walsh had a type. He targeted people who couldn't fight back, teenagers cutting through the park, single mothers with broken tail lights, the homeless. His reports were exercises in creative writing. Suspect became belligerent. Suspect assumed an aggressive stance. Accidental discharge of pepper spray. Marcus proved invaluable. While Harry worked the legal angles from the high tower of the DA's office, Marcus went down to the streets of Oak Creek. He went to the barber shops, the community centers, the basketball courts. People knew Marcus. They trusted him. "They're scared, man," Marcus reported back to Harry on day 4. "Everyone knows Walsh is dirty. But they also know O'Malley protects him. They think if they talk, Walsh will be back on the street in a week and coming for them." "Tell them that's not happening this time," Harry said, looking at a fresh file on his desk. "Tell them the wolf is chained up, and I'm holding the leash." The breakthrough came in the form of a terrified young man named Leo Vance. 5 years ago, Leo was 19, an honor student on his way to community college. Garrett had pulled him over for swerving. He found a single marijuana joint under the passenger seat, a joint Leo swore he'd never seen before. Garrett told Leo he could make it go away for $500 cash. Leo didn't have it. Garrett arrested him for possession with intent to distribute, inflating the charges. He roughed Leo up in the blind spot behind the station before booking him. Leo, terrified of prison, took a plea deal for probation. He lost his scholarship. He now worked 2 minimum-wage jobs just to survive. Harry brought Leo into the office. The young man was shaking when he saw the environment, the suits, the serious faces. "It's okay, Leo," Harry said gently, sliding a cup of water across the mahogany table. "Nobody here is going to hurt you. I want you to tell me exactly what Officer Walsh did to you." It took an hour for Leo to get the whole story out. By the end, Maria was openly wiping tears away, and Harry felt a murderous rage simmering beneath his professional exterior. This wasn't policing. This was predation. "We're going to vacate your conviction, Leo," Harry said at the end of the interview. "And then I'm going to put you on the stand, and you're going to point a finger at Garrett Walsh and tell the world what a monster he is." Leo wasn't the only one. Once word got out that Leo Vance was talking to the state prosecutor and that he hadn't been retaliated against, the floodgates opened. A woman whose arm Garrett had broken during a domestic dispute call where she was the victim. A construction worker who Garrett shook down for cash every payday just to not tow his work truck. Harry built a dossier thick enough to stun an ox. It wasn't just about Sarah Jenkins anymore. It was a 20-year tapestry of terror. Meanwhile, Garrett sat in county lockup. The reality was starting to set in. The first night, he had swaggered around the common area, telling the other inmates he'd be out in the morning, that it was all a misunderstanding with some uppity old lady. But the morning didn't bring bail. It brought the news that the state prosecutor had taken over the case and filed multiple felony charges. By day 3, the other inmates, some of whom Garrett had put there on trumped-up charges, were starting to circle. Garrett had to request solitary confinement for his own protection. The bully was suddenly the smallest fish in a very dangerous tank. He used his phone credits to call his union rep, Dave Bannister. "Davey, you got to get me out of here," Garrett whined into the receiver. "The DA is insane. They're charging me with kidnapping because I put her in the car." "Garrett, shut up and listen." Dave's voice was cold. "I saw the tape from the diner. It's everywhere. CNN is running it every hour." "So what? It looks worse than it is. I slipped." "Nobody believes that, Garrett. And now they're digging up the past. Leo Vance? Remember him?" Garrett felt the blood drain from his face. "That little punk, he's a drug dealer." "He's the DA's star witness, Garrett. And he's got company. A lot of company. The union is pulling your legal funding. We can't be associated with this. You're on your own." Click. Garrett stared at the dead phone receiver. He was alone in a concrete box, and outside, a storm of his own making was gathering strength. The day of the arraignment and bail hearing, the county courthouse looked more like a rock concert venue. Satellite trucks from every major news network lined the streets. Reporters jostled for position on the courthouse steps. The video of Garrett pouring coffee on a quiet, elderly black woman had gone viral globally. It touched a nerve, the casual cruelty of it, the arrogance. Sarah Jenkins had become an overnight symbol of quiet dignity in the face of systemic oppression. Harry made sure Sarah didn't have to face the media circus. She entered through a private back entrance, flanked by Marcus and 2 armed state troopers. Despite her injuries, she refused a wheelchair. She walked into the courtroom slowly, wincing occasionally. But her head was high. The courtroom was packed. The front row was reserved for Sarah and her family. Behind them sat the ghosts. Leo Vance and dozens of others Harry's team had located, all wearing their Sunday best, a silent Greek chorus of Garrett's failures. When Garrett was led in, a murmur went through the crowd. He wasn't wearing his uniform. He was in an oversized Orange County jumpsuit. He looked shrunken, heavy bags under his eyes, his usual reddish complexion replaced by a sickly grey pallor. He scanned the room, looking for friendly faces. His fellow officers, Chief O'Malley. None were there. The Oak Creek Police Department had distanced themselves faster than if he had the plague. Garrett's court-appointed lawyer, a weary man named Alan Finch, who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, stood up. "Your Honor, my client pleads not guilty to all charges. We request reasonable bail. Officer Walsh is a 22-year veteran of the force with strong ties to the community. He is not a flight risk." Judge Elena Rostova, a stern woman known for her no-nonsense approach, looked over her reading glasses at the defense table. Then she turned to Harry. "Mr. Prosecutor, your stance on bail." Harry walked to the podium. He didn't shout. He didn't need to. His voice was a low, controlled rumble that filled the cavernous room. "Your Honor, the people strenuously object to any bail. The defendant is a danger to the community. The defense mentions his 22 years on the force as a positive. We view it as a 22-year crime spree hidden behind a badge." Harry held up a manila folder. "I have here the sworn statements of 34 individuals, some of whom are present in this courtroom today, detailing a pattern of extortion, assault, fabrication of evidence, and civil rights violations committed by Mr. Walsh." He dropped the heavy folder onto the table. The thud echoed in the silence. Furthermore, the crime for which he was arrested was an act of wanton cruelty against a 72-year-old woman, resulting in second-degree burns. "We have the medical report here." Harry turned and gestured toward Sarah. "Mrs. Jenkins is a pillar of this community. She has spent her life caring for others. The defendant saw her quiet strength as weakness to be exploited for his own amusement. The video evidence, which the world has seen, shows a man who enjoys inflicting pain." Harry turned back to the judge, his eyes hard. "If you let him out, Your Honor, he will do what bullies always do when cornered. He will try to intimidate the witnesses who found the courage to speak up. He has done it before. We have proof. The only safe place for Garrett Walsh is a cage." Judge Rostova took a long moment to review the documents Harry had submitted. She looked at the medical photos of Sarah's burns. She looked at the faces of the victims in the gallery. Finally, she looked at Garrett, who was staring at the table, unable to meet anyone's gaze. "Mr. Finch," Judge Rostova said, addressing the defense lawyer, "the evidence presented by the state is overwhelming and disturbing. The nature of the assault on Mrs. Jenkins shows a shocking disregard for human dignity." She banged her gavel. "Bail is denied. The defendant will be remanded to the custody of the county jail pending trial. Next case." The courtroom erupted in low murmurs. Garrett looked up, panic in his eyes. No bail. That meant months inside, waiting for trial, surrounded by people who hated cops. As the bailiffs grabbed Garrett's arms to lead him away, he looked toward the gallery. He saw Leo Vance staring at him with cold satisfaction. He saw Marcus, looking like a mountain of retribution. And then his eyes met Sarah Jenkins. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't gloating. She just looked at him with that same profound disappointment she had shown in the diner. She saw him not as a monster, but as something small and broken that needed to be removed from society. Garrett looked away first. The shame was too heavy to bear. As the side door clicked shut behind him, taking him back to his cell, he realized his life as he knew it was over. The coffee had been spilled, and the stain would never wash out. 3 months passed between the arraignment and the trial. For Garrett Walsh, those 3 months were a slow-motion nightmare. He was housed in administrative segregation, ADSEG, for his own safety. 23 hours a day in a cell the size of a parking space. No coffee, no donuts, no badge to hide behind. His lawyer, Alan Finch, visited him once a week, looking more haggard each time. "They have everything, Garrett," Finch said one rainy Tuesday, rubbing his temples. "The forensic enhancement of the video shows you smiling before you poured the coffee. The audio expert confirmed you said, 'oops,' in a mocking tone. And the witness list, it's 30 pages long." "Can't we suppress the prior bad acts?" Garrett asked, his voice raspy from disuse. He had lost 30 pounds. His uniform would have hung off him like a scarecrow now. "We tried," Finch sighed. "Judge Rostova ruled it admissible. She said it establishes a pattern of conduct. Harry Sterling is painting a picture, and you're the only subject in the frame. They're offering a deal." Garrett sat up, hope flickering in his dull eyes. "What is it?" "Plead guilty to aggravated assault and civil rights deprivation. They drop the kidnapping charge. You do 10 years. 10 years! Garrett slammed his fist on the metal table. "I'm a cop. You can't put a cop in general population for 10 years. It's a death sentence." "It's the best you're going to get," Finch said bluntly. "If we go to trial and you lose, Sterling is asking for the maximum on consecutive counts. You're looking at 25 to life." Garrett slumped back. His pride, the same pride that made him pour that coffee, wouldn't let him fold. He couldn't imagine himself as a convict. He still believed deep down that a jury would see a man in a uniform and give him the benefit of the doubt. He believed the blue wall would hold. "No deal," Garrett whispered. "We go to trial." The trial. Day 1. The trial of the state versus Garrett Walsh began on a crisp autumn morning. The trees outside the courthouse were shedding their leaves, much like Garrett's life was shedding its layers of protection. Harry Sterling sat at the prosecution table. He looked immaculate in a charcoal suit, every inch the avenging angel. Next to him sat his second chair, a sharp young prosecutor named Chloe, and behind the bar sat Sarah Jenkins. Sarah looked different. The burns had healed, leaving silvery, sensitive scars on her legs and stomach, but her spirit seemed harder, like steel tempered in fire. She wore a deep blue dress, her hands folded calmly in her lap. The jury was selected carefully. 12 ordinary citizens, a schoolteacher, a mechanic, a nurse, a retired accountant. None of them looked like the type to be swayed by a badge alone. Harry's opening statement was a masterclass in controlled fury. "Ladies and gentlemen," Harry began, walking slowly in front of the jury box. "Trust. It is the currency of civilization. We trust that when we call 911, help will come. We trust that the uniform represents safety. But what happens when that trust is weaponized? What happens when the sheepdog decides to bite the sheep just because he can?" Harry gestured to Sarah. Sarah Jenkins went to get breakfast. She didn't break a law. She didn't cause a scene. She sat. She waited. And because she existed in a way that offended the ego of that man. Harry pointed a finger at Garrett, who flinched. She was burned, humiliated and caged. But this trial isn't just about coffee. It's about a predator who mistook silence for weakness. The defense's opening was weak. Finch tried to paint Garrett as a stressed, overworked public servant who made a tragic mistake in judgment during a tense encounter. The jury didn't seem to buy it. The testimony. The prosecution's case was a relentless drumbeat of evidence. First, the video. Harry played it on the massive screens in the courtroom. He played it at normal speed. Then he played it frame by frame. The courtroom was silent as the grave. The sight of the steaming liquid hitting Sarah, her immediate recoil, and Garrett's subsequent laughter was visceral. Juror number 4, the nurse, looked away, disgusted. Then came the doctor. Dr. Thorne projected the photos of Sarah's burns. The raw, blistered skin looked horrific on the large screen. "These injuries are consistent with liquid near the boiling point," Dr. Thorne testified. "The pain would have been instantaneous and excruciating. It would have felt like fire." But the turning point, the moment the trial went from a legal proceeding to a moral reckoning, was when Sarah Jenkins took the stand. She walked to the witness box with a cane, a new addition since the incident, as the scarring made walking painful on cold days. She swore in. "Mrs. Jenkins," Harry asked softly, "can you tell the jury what you were thinking when the defendant approached your table?" Sarah adjusted the microphone. Her voice was clear, filling the room without shouting. "I was thinking about my grandson," she said, looking at Marcus in the gallery. "I was thinking that I didn't want him to worry if I was late. I saw the officer coming. I saw the look in his eyes. I have seen that look before, Mr. Sterling. In the 60s? In the 70s? It is the look of a man who needs to hurt someone to feel tall. Did you say anything to provoke him?" "I told him I had a receipt. I told him I was waiting for a ride. And after he poured the coffee on you, what did he do?" Sarah looked directly at Garrett. For the first time in the trial, Garrett met her gaze. He expected hate. He expected anger. But he saw only pity. "He laughed," Sarah said. "He laughed like it was a joke. And then he told me to go clean myself up outside, like I was trash." A stifled sob broke out in the gallery. It was Becky, the waitress from the diner. Harry let the silence hang for a long moment. No further questions. Cross-examination was a disaster for the defense. Finch tried to suggest Sarah had been belligerent. Sarah simply smiled, a sad, knowing smile. "Sir, I am 72 years old. I was drinking herbal tea. Do I look like a threat to a 200-pound man with a gun?" Finch sat down, defeated. The ghosts arise. The next 2 days were a parade of Garrett's past victims. Leo Vance took the stand. He was clean-shaven, wearing a suit Harry had bought for him. He told the story of the planted drugs, the extortion, the ruined scholarship. "I wanted to be a nurse," Leo said, his voice cracking. "But you can't get a nursing license with a felony drug charge. He took my future because I didn't have $500. Then came Maria, the single mother. She testified how Garrett had solicited sexual favors in exchange for tearing up a traffic ticket. When she refused, he arrested her for DUI, even though she blew a 0.00 on the breathalyzer. The charges were dropped later, but she lost her job in the process. With each witness, Garrett shrank lower in his chair. The jury was glaring at him now. The blue wall had crumbled into dust. Even the bailiffs in the courtroom were looking at him with disdain. He wasn't a cop to them anymore. He was a stain on the badge. "The Hail Mary desperate," Garrett demanded to testify. "It's suicide," Finch hissed. "Sterling will eat you alive." "I have to explain," Garrett argued. "They need to hear my side." Against legal advice, Garrett Walsh took the stand on the 4th day. It was the moment Harry Sterling had been waiting for. Garrett's direct testimony was rehearsed and stiff. He talked about the stress of the job, the split-second decisions. He tried to cry, but it came off as forced. Then Harry stood up. He didn't bring any notes to the podium. He didn't need them. "Mr. Walsh," Harry said, his voice deceptively pleasant. "You testified that you felt threatened by Mrs. Jenkins. Is that correct?" "Yes," Garrett said, sweating. "She had an aggressive demeanor." "An aggressive demeanor," Harry repeated. "She was sitting down, you were standing up. She is 110 pounds, you are 230. She was unarmed. You had a baton, a taser, and a service pistol, and you felt threatened. It's not just about size," Garrett blustered. "It's about attitude. She was defying authority." "Is defying authority a crime, punishable by scolding Mr. Walsh?" Harry snapped, his voice rising. "No, but—" "You laughed," Harry cut in. "We saw the video. You laughed. If you were threatened, if it was an accident, why was your first reaction amusement?" It was a nervous reaction. Shock." "Shock," Harry scoffed. "And what about Leo Vance? Was planting drugs on him a nervous reaction, too?" "I never planted drugs," Garrett lied. Harry turned to the judge. "Your Honor, permission to treat the witness as hostile." "Granted." Harry walked up to the witness stand, leaning in close. "Mr. Walsh, we found the text messages on your personal phone. The ones you thought you deleted. The ones to your ex-wife where you bragged about, and I quote, bagging another thug and making your quota." Garrett's face went white. He didn't know they had the texts. "You enjoyed it," Harry said, his voice dropping to a terrifying whisper. "You didn't protect Oak Creek. You hunted in it. You liked the power. You liked seeing people beg. And when Sarah Jenkins didn't beg, when she looked you in the eye, you couldn't handle it. So you burned her." "She deserved it," Garrett screamed, snapping. The courtroom gasped. Garrett froze, realizing what he had just said. The silence was absolute. Harry stood back, a look of grim satisfaction on his face. He looked at the jury. They were stunned. "No further questions," Harry said. The verdict and the fall. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. When they returned, Garrett couldn't even look at them. He stared at his hands, the hands that had held the cup, the hands that had ruined so many lives. "We the jury," the foreman read, "find the defendant, Garrett Walsh, guilty on all counts." Guilty. Aggravated assault. Guilty. Kidnapping. Guilty. Civil rights deprivation. Guilty. Official misconduct. Judge Rostova didn't wait for a sentencing hearing. She had heard enough. "Mr. Walsh, please stand," she commanded. Garrett stood, his legs trembling so badly he had to lean on the table. "In my 20 years on the bench," Judge Rostova said, her voice shaking with suppressed anger, "I have seen murderers, rapists, and thieves. But I have rarely seen such a cowardly abuse of power. You didn't just hurt these people physically. You tried to break their spirits. You stained the reputation of every good officer in this state." She looked at Sarah Jenkins. "Mrs. Jenkins, I hope this brings you some measure of peace." She turned back to Garrett. "Garrett Walsh, I sentence you to 25 years in state prison. You will not be eligible for parole for at least 20 years. Furthermore, I am stripping you of your pension and ordering you to pay restitution to all victims identified in this court." The gavel banged. It sounded like a gunshot ending a life. As the bailiffs moved to handcuff him, real handcuffs this time, destined for a real prison van, Garrett looked back one last time. He saw Harry hugging Sarah. He saw Marcus shaking Leo Vance's hand. He saw a community healing. And he saw Sarah Jenkins looking at him. She raised her hand slowly, not in a wave of goodbye, but in a gesture of dismissal. She was done with him. He was no longer a threat. He was just a memory. Garrett was led away, the heavy oak doors closing on his life as a free man. 5 years later. The diner was still there, but it was under new management. It was cleaner, brighter. And at table 4 there was a small brass plaque bolted to the wall, reserved for Sarah Jenkins. Sarah was 77 now. She moved a little slower, but she was still sharp. She sat at the table, sipping tea, never coffee. Across from her sat Harrison Sterling. He wasn't the district attorney anymore. He was the Attorney General of the state, and rumors were swirling about a run for governor. "How is the scholarship fund coming along?" Sarah asked, adjusting her glasses. "It's great, Nana," Harry smiled. "The Sarah Jenkins Justice Initiative just awarded its 50th full-ride scholarship. Leo Vance graduated nursing school last week. He sent you a card." Sarah smiled, tracing the rim of her cup. "That boy has good hands. He will help many people." "And the police reform bill passed," Harry added. "The Walsh Act, mandatory body cams, independent oversight for all use of force complaints, and the end of qualified immunity for acts of malice. It's changing everything." Garrett Walsh was currently in maximum security prison. He had aged 20 years in 5. He worked in the laundry, scrubbing stains out of other people's clothes, a bitter irony that wasn't lost on him. He had no friends inside. The Aryan gangs didn't trust him because he was a cop. The Black and Latino gangs hated him for what he did. He was alone, truly and completely. Every time he saw steam rising from a cup in the chow hall, he flinched. Back in the diner, Marcus walked in. He was holding a baby girl, Sarah's great-granddaughter. "Look who's awake," Marcus grinned, handing the baby to Sarah. Sarah took the child in her arms. Her hands, scarred but strong, cradled the new life. "She looks like you, Marcus," Sarah cooed. "She has your eyes, Nana," Marcus said softly. Harry watched them. He thought about the coffee. He thought about the pain. He thought about how one act of hate had been intended to destroy this woman, but instead it had illuminated her. It had brought the darkness to light and burned it away. Sarah Jenkins wasn't just the woman who got coffee poured on her. She was the matriarch of a revolution. She was the quiet storm that cleaned the streets. She looked out the window at the bustling street, a street that was a little safer, a little fairer than it was that Tuesday morning. "You know," Sarah said, looking at her boys, "I never did get to finish my breakfast that day." Harry laughed, signaling the waitress. "Becky?" Can we get the menu?" Becky, who was now the manager of the diner, hurried over with a smile that lit up the room. "For you, Mrs. Jenkins, anything you want. On the house. Forever." Sarah smiled, holding her great-granddaughter close. "Just tea, dear, and maybe a slice of pie. Life is sweet, after all." "So what is the lesson here?" Garrett Walsh thought power was about noise. He thought it was about violence, intimidation, and making people feel small. But he was wrong. True power is quiet. True power is the resilience of a woman like Sarah Jenkins, who spent a lifetime pouring love into others, only to have that love return as a shield when she needed it most. Garrett poured scalding coffee, hoping to leave a stain. Instead, he started a fire that cleansed the corruption from an entire city. He forgot the golden rule of the universe. Karma doesn't always come instantly, but when it comes, it doesn't miss. And never, ever underestimate the person sitting quietly in the corner. You don't know who they are, you don't know what they've survived, and most importantly, you don't know who they raised.